Satavia.
Is there anything due tonight?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Is there anything that's due tonight?
No,
Okay.
there isn't. Thank you. So I'm going to create one final vocabulary um, discussion board for 20th century. I'll do that. I'll do that this week, and you'll have until the finals week to finish it. Um, and the last quiz, I'm going to incorporate it into the final exam. So that is what you have coming up. I'm just about through the third quiz grading, and I will reopen that for those of you who want to take it again. Yes, Jessica.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm confused. So we're not gonna take another quiz, but you're gonna put like, I don't know, like more questions on the final like
Yes.
exam or?
Yeah, so the final exam is going to emphasize what you have done. I guess it's going to emphasize more recent information, but it will include some questions that go back through earlier parts of the semester. Um, and so, does that answer your question?
And yeah, that one we take it also online, or we're taking it the last day that we come here?
You will
Like
take it
just
online. I'll do a similar thing where we will make this, I'll make it available during finals week.
okay. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. And let's see. Shazia.
When are the note cards due? If next week is the last week we're meeting in person, you said?
Yes, next week is the last week we're meeting in person. Um, I'll talk to Carl. What we've done in the past, since our final exam isn't like just on a day, we've been able to just do it online and not have a meeting. If it is a requirement that we meet, that I be there and we all meet, then you would be able to do it then. I think what I'll do is just say that, like, if you don't submit them next week, you can submit them the Wednesday of exam, by the Wednesday of exam week, and I'll be on campus to get them. I'll give you clarification of like what our exam week is going to look like soon.
Okay. So we have an exam discussion board and the cards due. Those are the three things that are left then.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Tomorrow. Your microphone is off.
Talia just sent me an email. She's telling me that she sent you an email. She wants you to respond back to her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see that she just did. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Mm-hmm. Um, okay. Thank you. Just responded. So, all right, let's I guess let's talk about some architecture and interiors then. A second to close that. Oh, there it is. Where the heck up there? Okay. Sharing screen. Okay, can you all see this? Oh,
Yes.
Yes.
good. Shazia, do you have another question? Oops. Okay. All right. So while we're like in the presentation here, I probably won't be able to see if you have your hand raised. So you can just turn your microphone on and ask a question. Okay. So tonight the emphasis will be on some more contemporary, I guess, more recent architecture, like a lot of like 80s, 90s, a lot of 90s architecture and design. So if have any of you ever heard this term deconstruction?
No.
No. Well, I heard it a lot when I was in school because it was the hot thing. Deconstruction in I guess in literary analysis or critique was a little bit, I guess, it's a little bit different than the way it expressed itself in architecture and design. Nowadays, often people use deconstruction when they really mean analysis. I've heard people use this term to refer to like deconstructing something when they're really just analyzing it. And so, in terms of like it's as an expression of postmodern, I guess postmodernism. So, like deconstruction in architecture, it is a type of 20th century architecture that sets itself in opposition to modernism, specifically the ordered rationality of modernism. So we talked about this last week, but I did not specifically use the term deconstruction. Intentional discord is a feature of deconstruction, a dismantling of modernism. But the goal of deconstruction is to arrive at a new thought or perspective by taking apart an already existing idea and reorganizing it as something new. Deconstruction seeks to identify areas of conflict or contradiction in modernism as a point of departure from that style. So, good deconstruction builds something, after dismantling modernism. It's not just taking something apart and leaving the pieces lying around. All right, so this guy, Richard Meyer, American architect, kind of like I think to me, one of the last modernists with a capital M. He's kind of lumped in with the postmodernists, and I think partly because he's taking the sort of I don't know. I guess it's more like he's taking modernism to something, to me, something of a logical conclusion. The reason I say that is if you look at this house by the Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier, this is Via Savoy from 1929. This kind of a house, similar to the Mies van der Rohe Tugendhat house, was really more like a bit of a laboratory project, where it was one of the first times anyone had built a house like this with these materials and at this scale. So this is the same year as Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona pavilion. Here's an interior of the Via Savoy. You see these big volumes, just like white surfaces and large volumes. So it's going back to 1929. This kind of architecture did appear in the U.S. This is by a guy named Edward Durrell Stone. This is the Mandel House in New York, back in the 1930s. So to me, like, he definitely was aware of Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe. And so then you get the Richard Meyer, to me, is almost like it's like a more modern, more refined version of that same idea of this large modernist house with a lot of white surfaces. So this house, this Douglas house up in Harbor Springs, Michigan, kind of, in a way, some of this like structure is a little bit like it's always reminded me a little bit of like being on a ship. Large, expansive interior. Interestingly, you see the furniture like right in front. There are some of these, but these like, early like modernist chairs. Looks like the Marcel Breuer. Yeah, I don't know if that quite is the Marcel Breuer Vassili chair, but this is Le Corbusier right here, the Grand Confort chair. Another view from the balcony inside. It's really a beautiful space, and it's a celebration of space. This is kind of like I see this a lot with like new construction, very tall ceilings, big open spaces. It's kind of like just like a nice environment to be in. Also, you see this is like this modernist idea. The flooring is the same, or looks like it's the same, going from inside to the outside. The interior flooring is finished differently than the exterior on the deck, and what really looks like it's just the structure, like these windows, like the house is just set down on top of it. A little more involved than that. I've always wondered about like these houses, like in a place like Harbor Springs, which is up in northwestern Michigan. It's built on like a very steep incline, and there would be a lot of work. You can see there's a lot there would be a lot of work to make sure that is structurally sound over the long haul, because that's a more precarious spot. As the ground moves, here's a nice view from above. There. Here's another little bit of the Getty Center by Richard Meyer in Los Angeles. So a lot of large white surfaces, big open spaces. And this seems to be, we kind of like set the tone for what a lot of like modern architecture would look like. All right, and so another of these, the postmodernists. So, Robert Venturi, this is his mother's house in Chestnut Hill, in Pennsylvania. So one of the things I remember, hearing about with the postmodernists, a lot of them were taught sort of pure, this more pure and orthodox modernism, where you had a lot of rules and you couldn't use an arch, couldn't use you couldn't use anything that looked classical. And at some point, some of these guys, when they were young, just decided, I'm tired of it. What's the matter with an arch? What's the matter with, referring generally to classical? Oh, cool. So you drew this for the CAD midterm. Yeah, let's go back to this. So, this whole, the whole facade here with this, nice large pitched roof and this slot, it's really like a gigantic broken pediment. And that's something that, Mr. Venturi would have certainly known. And this kind of odd, arched form, I guess, detail, I think is really kind of, it's not necessary, but it's ornament. Here is the interior with some really traditional furniture. This colonial style furniture. So his mother is the client, so it's her stuff in there. But these nice big white surfaces, and some nice generous space above. Oops, go back. Sorry, crazy little mouse here. And we saw these last week. This sort of toy, sort of like what to me has always looked kind of like toy furniture or children's furniture. And it was really this meant to be a playful exercise, or just like a playful expression of what you can do with furniture if you want to. And this is the kind of thing that would not have been allowed under modernism. If you did this, you would have had to hide it. And then here, this is a Queen Anne chair with grandmother pattern. Pastels where I remember the 80s, pastels were popular. And this kind of geometric, you can see these two kind of two lines in the pattern, kind of just printed over the top of the floral pattern. That really, to me, pastels and grays together, definitely an 80s thing. All right, another of these guys. We saw this also last time. This Charles Moore, the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, with and neon. Neon, you can write this down. Neon was an 80s thing. It was everywhere. It wasn't necessarily new, but I think it was I guess it was a sort of a new application of neon, to just use it to emphasize edges in architecture. And you can see the neon just running up here along the the top of the entablature, below the cornice, up over the arch. It's it's kind of to me, it's kind of cool and kind of tacky all at the same time, which I don't know if Charles Moore would argue. Maybe he wouldn't necessarily say tacky, but definitely kind of lowbrow. Oops. All right. I think I'm missing a slide there. So this is Charles Moore. This is for the drawing down here is for an art center. I think it's in uh, Fargo, Minnesota, South Dakota, whichever, like up there, Minnesota, North Dakota area. And this, I'd seen this this sort of ideal city that was dreamed up. Like there were a lot of people in the 19th century just kind of dreaming up sort of utopian civilizations. Utopian civilizations were uh, pretty hot in the 19th century, and Ledoux was one of the people who he made very detailed drawings of what these ideal places or ideal cities would look like. I think it's really interesting that this Charles Moore facade looks a lot like Ledoux's drawing. But you can see this like big kind of out of scale, just grid pattern and simplified arches, and even like this, like what looks like it might be like the capital, which is really not a very useful capital on this column, is really just more like this, like there's this shape pattern you see repeating throughout, and it's really this kind of like oversized, simplified geometry. This is a model of a building by Michael Graves, this Portland Public Services building. And it was a kind of a thing in architecture, in the like postmodern architecture, that it got simplified to the point where it looked a little bit like it was like toy architecture. And it was meant to be like big and bold, and have almost like it's got like a graphical surface with these gigantic shapes. This sort of like inverted trapezoid, and this like what looks like might be columns but really aren't columns. And so much color that you would never see in modernism. It's kind of grown on me. When I first saw it, I thought it was just too weird, but it's grown on me. It kind of just belongs to that period. Like it belongs to a certain era that has passed. And here is a interior. These chairs, to me, like they're very similar to some like Art Deco furniture. But very simple, and really simple and simplified. So there's ornament, but a lot of ornament is either understated or exaggerated but still kind of flat. He also designed. Got into industrial design. I had a mop that I bought at Target that was designed by Michael Graves. He just got into designing all kinds of things. Just a moment, I'll be right back. Oh, that was take us out of the show here. Okay. Just a moment, be right back. Okay, I have returned. Let's go back up there. Okay, you still see? Okay. You can still see this? I didn't knock it off. It looks like you can still see this.
Yeah, we could still see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So similar to Richard Meyer, this is a similar like around the same time as the previous the first thing I showed you by Richard Meyer. This like architecture done in planes, like sort of like modernism loved the rectangle and loved this kind of like almost like a composition of planes and volumes, so that part of the I guess it was sort of part of what they were doing in trying to eliminate any reference to classical architecture. So this is really stripped down, and going back to the earlier modernists, this is 1924, the Dutch architect and designer Gerrit Rietveld, the Schroeder House in the Netherlands, which was really it's a very it's kind of a straightforward composition of shape, of really like rectangular composition. You see a little bit of red. This house used the same primary color scheme with like black and white and primaries, which was really more like a modernist theme. You see the drawing by Theo van Doesburg around the same time. That is, it was in the air for those guys. So you see this Peter Eisenman doing something similar. So I guess there's sort of this transition where you have the beginnings of postmodernism. They're really just there are some people sort of like bringing modernism to a conclusion with houses such as this one.
So is that house an example of modernism or deconstruction?
This to me, this to me is more like the beginnings of deconstruction.
Okay.
Because this idea, one of the things that, like, if you think of deconstruction as like they're trying to find like where are the problems in modernism, and that's where we start to take it apart. So one of the problems with modernism is seriousness. It had to be serious, and I think some of these artists decided we want something that's a little bit more playful, or a lot more playful. And so this one, I think it's like breaking this out, like changing some of the angles, and just having some of these like volumes look like they're running through each other or crossing each other. So this is deconstruction.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. All right. So when you get into some of this, where do you go from this more like rational, it's vertical and horizontal. Eventually we get into some stuff like this. Zaha Hadid, who was the first woman to win the Pritzker Prize in Architecture, which is a big worldwide prize that one architect gets each year. This idea of just like thinking in planes and not being limited to just the rectangle. This is like a really more like an experimental collage. This in Japan, the monsoon restaurant, and you see these like a lot of dark surfaces and then big, colorful planes, just sort of sweeping through the whole place. It looks. Does it look chaotic to you? How does this interior look to you?
It was kind of scary though.
Kind of scary, yeah. Sharp.
Yeah,
in
it's
some
too dark.
dark. Sometimes, depending on the type of restaurant, you might want dark. Um, but yeah, in a way, I think you have these very dark surfaces that set off the colorful surfaces. But it does look like a little hard to read. It's like how do you move through it? Just in terms of interior design, it looks like it's kind of hard to navigate.
Confusing.
Kind of confusing, yeah. I mean, I don't particularly want to be confused by an interior when I go into it. Although, it's almost like I think this is some of what, when architects and interior designers start to shed the restraints of modernism, they do things that, if you're going to, rationalism or like a rational approach to architecture is to them one of the problems because it's too rigid. That's another area where they will attack modernism and create something that's irrational because it's unique. We prize novelty. So it was kind of like it's a place to go with your architecture if you're trying to find something new, like for that time. Here, Daniel Liebeskind, the Denver Art Museum. This one is really so this is where it's things, when you get 90s and the aughts, you start to get things that look really chaotic. And, the engineering is sound, so it can look like the building is sort of tumbling over, and it's not. But this idea of creating these, this is part of this is the building is meant to be interesting. Does that look interesting to you?
Yes.
Yeah. Does this look appealing to you?
Yes, it actually makes you wonder what else is inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely tell it's like a museum.
It's got to be something interesting when it looks like that. It would be a bit of a letdown if it were an insurance, this is where you go to buy, it's insurance headquarters. Although that's, that would be a kick-ass insurance headquarters. So here's the interior. And so you get these, you can sort of the interior kind of looks like, it kind of matches the exterior with unusual angles. You don't have parallel surfaces. I don't other than the stairway going down, I don't see a whole lot of parallel edges. And that was kind of a really I remember that for 80s, 90s, setting something at an unusual angle was interesting because you'd have look like right angles for such a long time. All right, now here, this is this troublemaker, Frank Gehry. Any of you ever heard of Frank Gehry?
Yes.
What do you know about him?
He's done the what's that music pavilion in Grant Park downtown. He designed that. Lots of reflective planes intersecting, a lot like what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, he did design the band shell at Millennium Park, and started. You know, he's uh, as far as I know, he's still alive. He's got to be retired. His still probably still designing buildings, and his office is making them now. But so he is. I think he's a good person to look at just in terms of the kinds of choices that he would make. So this is his home. I don't know if he still lives here, but his home in Santa Monica, California. Um, and you see when this I guess addition was done. So what do you see in terms of materials and surfaces here?
Steel wood.
Plywood, corrugated metal, chain link fence, and then there's a traditional house. So it's like a house. I think it was like built in like the 30s, and he decided he needed more space, and so he built out from the house and just like enclosed new areas and expanded the size of the interior. But you see, like if you lived next door to this guy, would you think that he was finished building his house yet?
No.
It's, I've seen him interviewed and talk about his house, and he, I think this was like I think he was antagonist. I mean, like he wanted to do it because this is what he wanted. He wanted to see architecture look like this, and he really didn't care if he antagonized his neighbors or not. So there, some of the exterior with this just exposed plywood. This is. I've seen this more and more in architecture, where like exposed surfaces like this that would normally be covered up are sometimes left uncovered, and sometimes they'll just put a finish on it because they think they like the plywood. Here's his kitchen. And you can see, I love this. Actually, I really like this kitchen. You can see like there's the skylight I think it's to the right in this photo. It's right there. You're looking right into the kitchen there. You can see that here on the left side of this photo, this is the old exterior wall of the house, and he expanded out, and so he made his kitchen. Just like what was outside the house at one point. And it's a nice little lot of space. Looks like he's got a bunch of old vintage cabinet, like different vintage cabinets installed. And here, and I have to say, I'm interested in what he did. I don't know if I would want to live in it, but he removed what looks like he removed plaster and had the lath preserved, and all the like the joists, and normally you wouldn't leave that stuff exposed, but apparently that was what he wanted. What do you think of that? Would you do it?
It's really interesting.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if I don't know if I would do it. Frank Gehry also has designed furniture, and here we have his Easy Edges line of furniture made with cardboard. It's like that's all corrugated cardboard, very dense, sort of like laminated and formed to create furnishings. Kind of cool, isn't it? Here, more corrugated furniture, the little beaver chair. Any response to that?
It doesn't look comfortable at all.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I can almost feel the scratchiness without even needing to sit in it. But this is like this is something that is it's a conceptual, in a way, conceptual exercise. But Frank Gehry was quite serious about it. This going back to the chain link. So one of the things he liked, he likes to challenge, challenge people with his architecture. And he was talking about this house, the like what he has done with his house. And he said, so I put a little chain link up, and everybody gets mad. And he said, everyone hates chain link fencing. Nobody likes to see it, including myself. He said, but for some reason, we as a society use a lot of it. And so he is kind of asking, why do we use so much of something that we say we hate or that we think is ugly? And so he is using it and trying to make it something that can be seen as at least interesting, if not beautiful. So I can appreciate that he goes, he's really committed to these ideas of challenging, really challenging everyone to think and, sort of examine your assumptions that you make about things. Fish lamps. I like the fish lamps. So he does, so you get this thing with the fish where, he likes the form of the fish, and he would use it with just like here he has like the head and the tail of the fish are cut off, and you're just using this the form of the body of a fish is the basis for the form of what he's using as, I guess it's like it's not interior space, it's just like part of the roof, really part of the roof of this building. The Cabrillo Marine Museum. Vitra Design Museum. It's south in Germany. This is this is where I guess we're getting into. Yeah, this is like later 80s. He's starting to get into this like style of architecture where he's really like there's a lot of structure, like framing under this architecture so that he can make it look like it is curving, that almost like these blocks are just sitting set, wedged in on each other. And he likes seeing like a dynamic composition. He wants it to look like there's action, that it's moving. And like, the interiors I think are really quite beautiful, because you also, with a lot of what goes on the outside, you see some of that on the inside with some really interesting edges. But here, this Vitra Design Museum has this museum of furniture. So you may be familiar with the Guggenheim Museum that he designed in Bilbao. which is northern Spain, in the Basque region of Spain. And this house was like it was part of a, sort of grew out of a different project that he worked on. There's a museum, it's a documentary of uh, uh, Frank Gehry's work on a project called A Constructive Madness. It lasts about an hour. If you're interested in watching documentaries about architects and architecture or design, then you might check it out. It's quite interesting because he started out working on a house for a private client who was the CEO of Progressive Insurance, and the guy was very interested in architecture and design. He kept pushing Frank Gehry, like, make it bigger, make it weirder, make it more interesting, do things that have never been done before. And then after around 10 years, this guy cancels the project. And so the whole documentary is all about how that project sort of pushed him into, trying things he wouldn't have tried otherwise, and really suggests that it led him to this. So that I think it's I like his art. I like his architecture. It's kind of known for having problems from construction because it's difficult to build this, and so I think some people dislike his work because some of his buildings leak. Anybody seen? Are any of you familiar with this building?
I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah. Any opinions about this building? Interesting. Would it make you want to go inside to see this?
Yes.
Yeah. It looks like it's from the future.
It does.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think I think that would I mean, I think that would be, to me, that would be a great compliment if someone saw my work and thought, like, this looks like the future, because it definitely doesn't look like anything that's been done in the past. So just in terms of originality and trying to push architecture into a new place, I think he does it. So here's a view of it down the street. Now, it's titanium. This is like clad with like these titanium panels, and apparently at certain times of day when the light hits that, it's really hard to drive down some of these streets because you can't see. So the Guggenheim is a museum, and the Guggenheim, you remember Frank Lloyd Wright Guggenheim in New York City? The Guggenheim in Bilbao is an extension of that, the Guggenheim Foundation and the museum, because they don't have enough space for their collection just in New York. So they've tried franchising it. I think they tried opening one in Rio de Janeiro. They were going to open one in St. Petersburg. But I think some of those projects did not, they kind of ran out of funding. Anyhow, someone's got a microphone on. Abby.
Sorry, I'm eating.
Okay, I can hear a little bit of feedback. Okay. So you see here, so it's a museum. You see here, this is you see this gigantic little, like, it's a terrier topiary. It's by the artist Jeff Koons. And what they do is they plant little, like, flowers, like petunias, all over it. And then they all bloom. And it's a giant blooming terrier. So here is the main entry. So here, like, this is like this idea with the like weird angles, like sort of almost a little disorienting in a way, because he knew he was creating architecture that was not familiar to anybody. So even like this, the glass entryway that bends, and really makes these things look like they're bending when um, there's a lot of work that goes into building the structure to make them appear to be bending and falling in on each other when they're all quite stable. There's a view of the interior atrium looking up. So a lot of big white surfaces, and a lot of windows, a lot of glass. There is an interior view with some of the artwork. So this main atrium has some very large scale artwork. I'm not particularly fond of this piece of artwork, but I'm not the one buying the work for the collection for the Guggenheim, so I don't get to choose it. But they do have more like galleries that are more traditional, like rectangular box galleries. But a lot of this, this is about like to Frank Gehry. I'm sure this is really about celebrating interior and architectural space. And another view of the interior. So, as a gallery, some in the arts community feel that this museum is just too much for the artwork. That there's too much going on, and the artwork gets lost. But I've heard what I actually like as a counterpoint. Some artists will say, well, if my work can't stand up to the architecture, maybe my work doesn't belong there. You see this sculpture right here by Richard Serra. This is like 3 curving panels of the Core 10 steel, and it takes something that massive to stand up to this part of the Guggenheim in Bilbao. This is the Condé Nast cafeteria in New York, and how about that curving glass?
It almost looks like kind of bubbles.
Yeah.
Something. It looks
It's cool.
flexible.
Yeah. Well, it does, because there's so much of it. There's a lot of reflection. And I think maybe in a way similar to that the image like the Zaha Hadid interior, that restaurant. This is also a little disorienting. I mean, at least he gives you a railing. Okay, so how is that Frank Gehry? Does he seem all right to you? Well, I think he's an important person to look at, and a very important person to know about. Okay, I need to take a short break here. I'm going to stop the recording. There's my